Keep your hands where I can see them." That was the first thing Officer Daniel Hargrove said when he stepped out into the blue and red wash of his patrol lights. And from the way he said it, cold and sharp like he had already decided what kind of people sat inside that black SUV, Marcus Reed knew this was never going to be a routine traffic stop. The road stretched empty for miles outside Fairfax, Virginia, a quiet strip of asphalt bordered by dark trees and low winter grass, the kind of road that made every flashing light feel bigger than it was. Marcus kept both hands steady on the steering wheel, his wedding band catching the passing pulse of red and blue across the windshield, while beside him Naomi Reed sat straight-backed in the passenger seat, one hand resting near her purse, the other folded calmly in her lap. They had been driving home from a charity dinner in D.C., still dressed too nicely for this stretch of highway. Marcus in a charcoal suit with his tie loosened, Naomi in a navy blouse under a cream coat, elegant and composed in a way that should have read as ordinary to any reasonable person. But reason had already left the scene. Hargrove approached the driver's side with one hand near his belt and suspicion written across his face, so openly it barely needed words. Still, he gave them anyway. "License and registration," he said, shining his flashlight into Marcus's face before dragging it across Naomi's. "You know why I pulled you over?" Marcus answered the way careful men answer when they understand the danger of sounding offended. "No, officer." Hargrove let out a dry laugh that held no humor at all. "That's funny. This vehicle drifted twice, and I find it real interesting when a car like this is out here after midnight." A car like this. He did not explain the phrase, because he did not have to. It sat there in the air between them, ugly and familiar. Marcus reached slowly for his wallet. "Officer, I was well within the lane." "I didn't ask for commentary," Hargrove snapped. Then he leaned lower, shining the light across the leather interior, the dashboard, the watch on Marcus's wrist, the diamond studs in Naomi's ears, as if every detail offended him more than the last. "Who does this vehicle belong to?" "It's registered to my wife," Marcus said. That answer changed something in Hargrove's eyes. He turned toward Naomi and looked at her longer than necessary, not with interest, but with disbelief. "Your wife," he repeated. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Marcus's jaw tightened, but Naomi touched his sleeve lightly before he could speak. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, but it carried weight. She turned her eyes to the officer with a calm that did not match the tension building around them. "Officer," she said softly, "is there a reason you're escalating this?" Hargrove smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when they think power belongs only to them. "I'll decide what's being escalated." The wind moved through the roadside brush with a dry whisper. Far off, another set of headlights passed on the opposite side of the highway and disappeared into the dark. Inside the SUV, the silence thickened. Naomi glanced once at the black leather wallet beside her, then back at the officer. She did not reach for it. Not yet. And that was the part Hargrove did not understand. He thought her stillness meant fear. He thought Marcus's restraint meant weakness. He thought this was just another late-night stop, another black couple he could question, corner, and diminish under flashing lights on an empty American road. He had no idea that in less than a minute, the night would stop belonging to him. Naomi moved first, but only just enough to reach for the handle of her door with slow, deliberate care, the kind that comes from experience, not hesitation. The cold night air slipped into the SUV the moment she stepped out, carrying the scent of damp pavement and pine from the tree line beyond the shoulder. Her heels touched the gravel with a soft crunch, and she stood with her chin level, coat buttoned against the wind, every part of her composed in a way that made Officer Hargrove even more irritated. Some men did not know what to do with calm when they were hoping for fear. Hargrove circled toward the passenger side, flashlight in hand, his beam jumping across the side mirror, the chrome trim, the polished door handle, then settling on Naomi's face as though he expected guilt to reveal itself under enough light. "You two coming from a party or something?" he asked, but his tone made clear that the question was not really a question. "We were driving home," Naomi said. "From Washington." "That's so." He glanced back at Marcus still seated behind the wheel, hands visible, posture rigid. Funny thing is, people who have nothing to hide usually answer faster than that. Marcus looked through the open driver's window, keeping his voice steady. "We have answered every question you asked." Hargrove ignored him. His attention stayed fixed on Naomi, as if Marcus being present changed nothing about who he thought held less power in this moment. "Ma'am, where exactly are you coming from?" "A fundraising dinner in Georgetown." "For what?" "A youth scholarship program." Hargrove let out another short laugh, the same thin little sound that carried contempt better than anger ever could. "That is a nice story." He swept the beam of his flashlight down her coat, her clutch, the bracelet at her wrist, then back to the SUV. "You expect me to believe this is your vehicle?" Naomi did not blink. "You can verify the registration." "I can verify whatever I want," he said. "The issue is whether I think you are telling the truth." There it was again, not suspicion based on fact, but suspicion based on presence, on skin, on the quiet offense of seeing a black couple in a luxury vehicle after midnight and deciding the picture did not fit the story he believed about the world. Naomi folded her hands in front of her, more to contain the moment than herself. "Officer, if you are alleging a crime, please be specific." His jaw hardened at that. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to crowd the air between them. "You do not get to tell me how this stop goes." He angled his flashlight toward the interior again. "Marcus, step out of the vehicle." The name sounded wrong in his mouth, too casual, too deliberate, as if using it without respect was its own small assertion of control. Marcus obeyed carefully, opening the door one measured inch at a time before rising to his full height beside the SUV. The road felt narrower with all three of them standing there now, the patrol car lights spinning over black paint, cold glass, and tense faces. "Stand by the hood," Hargrove ordered. Marcus did not move right away. "Officer, may I ask what this is about?" "You may not." Hargrove pointed toward the front of the cruiser. "You fit several indicators." "Indicators of what?" Naomi asked. "Of people who think they can outsmart the wrong officer." He said it like a verdict, and for a brief second the only sound was the steady click of the patrol lights and the hum of traffic somewhere far off. Imagine standing on the side of an empty Virginia highway, dressed for an evening that had begun with speeches and laughter, and realizing that none of it mattered now, not the degrees, not the work, not the discipline it took to survive in rooms built to doubt you, because in this moment one man with a badge had decided your dignity was negotiable. Naomi looked at Marcus, then toward the black leather wallet resting just inside the passenger seat. She could end this now. She knew that. But something in Hargrove's face told her he had done this before, had pushed and prodded and diminished people like this before, always certain the night would protect him. So she waited one more beat, letting him keep talking, letting him show her exactly who he was. Marcus took his place near the hood of the patrol car without another word, the rotating lights washing his face in red, then blue, then red again, until he looked less like a husband on his way home and more like a silhouette pinned in place by someone else's assumptions. Naomi remained beside the SUV, close enough to see the tightness in his jaw, close enough to recognize the old discipline in the way he kept his shoulders squared and his hands still. She knew that posture. She had seen it in court hallways, in airport security lines, in boardrooms where men smiled too quickly and listened too little. It was the posture of a black man calculating how much of himself he could safely show in a moment that was already unfair. Officer Hargrove walked between them with the restless confidence of someone performing authority rather than simply holding it. He asked for Marcus's identification again, though he had already seen it, then turned it over in his hand as if the card itself might reveal a lie. "Marcus Reed," he said slowly. "Address checks out." "That is interesting." Marcus kept his eyes forward. "Interesting how?" Hargrove ignored the question. He looked at Naomi once more. "And you said the vehicle is registered to you?" "Yes," Naomi answered. "Then maybe you will not mind explaining how a couple like you ends up driving a $100,000 SUV through Fairfax County after midnight." The words landed exactly the way he intended. Not loud, not dramatic, just sharp enough to strip away any pretense that this was about lane drift or procedure. "A couple like you." Naomi felt the air grow even colder, though the temperature had not changed. "A couple like us," she repeated, her voice level. "What exactly does that mean, officer?" For the first time, Hargrove hesitated, but only for a second. Men like him rarely backed away once they sensed the line beneath their feet. "It means," he said, glancing at Marcus's suit and Naomi's jewelry, "people try to look respectable all the time. Does not make every story true." Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. Naomi could feel the anger rising off him now. Not reckless anger, but wounded anger, the kind that comes when dignity is questioned in front of the person you love. She wanted to end it. She wanted to open the door, reach for the leather wallet, and let the badge speak for itself. But another instinct held her still. Hargrove was not just talking. He was building a record of himself, one sentence at a time, one choice at a time, under his own body camera, under the silent gaze of the dashboard lens, under the wide black sky that had watched too many moments like this in America and remembered every one of them. "Officer," Naomi said, "if you believe there is a legitimate issue, then conduct the stop professionally. Otherwise, we would like to continue home." His mouth tightened. "You do not direct this stop. Then tell us what law you believe was broken." That question changed the energy again. Hargrove took one slow step closer, then another, not enough to threaten, but enough to assert himself through proximity, through that old language of control men like him knew by instinct. "You want to help your husband?" he asked. "Then stop talking and keep your hands where I can see them." Naomi held his stare. "My hands are visible. Do not get smart with me." The patrol radio crackled from inside the cruiser, a burst of static followed by a dispatcher's voice too distant to make out. Somewhere overhead, the moon slipped from behind a cloud and silvered the windshield of the SUV. Naomi caught her reflection in the passenger window for just a moment. Calm face, steady eyes, cream coat bright against the dark roadside. He saw a black woman standing where he thought she should not stand. He saw a target for his suspicion. What he did not see was a federal agent measuring him with every breath, every word, every reckless little choice he kept making as if the night belonged to him alone. Officer Hargrove turned away from Naomi and walked back toward his cruiser with Marcus's identification still in hand, but he did not move like a man checking paperwork. He moved like a man looking for permission to go further. The beam from his flashlight swung low over the pavement, then up across the SUV again, pausing on the rear seats, the center console, the luggage in the back. Each stop of the light a quiet accusation. Marcus stayed where he had been told, standing near the front of the patrol car under the cold spin of red and blue, while Naomi remained beside the passenger door, every sense sharpened by the kind of silence that comes right before a storm decides whether it will pass or break. Hargrove opened the door of his cruiser, leaned in, and spoke into the radio in a low voice. Naomi could not catch every word, but she heard enough to understand the shape of it. Out-of-state event, luxury vehicle, uncooperative attitude. He was building a narrative, laying down details that sounded official enough to hide the truth underneath them. That was how men like him worked. They wrapped instinct in procedure and hoped no one looked closely at the seams. When he stepped back out, his expression had hardened into something more certain, as though the sound of his own voice over police radio had reminded him how much power he thought he had. "I'm going to need to take a look inside the vehicle," he said. Marcus lifted his head. "On what basis?" "On the basis that I have questions." "That is not probable cause," Naomi said. Hargrove looked at her as if the phrase itself offended him. "I did not ask you." "You were speaking about my property," she replied. "So yes, you did." For a moment the highway seemed to go completely still. No passing headlights. No wind through the trees. Just that one exchange hanging in the air between them, bright and dangerous. Hargrove took a slow breath, and when he spoke again his voice had the clipped patience of someone trying very hard not to say what he really meant. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am." Naomi did not move. "Are you ordering me to consent to a search?" "I am ordering you to step away." Marcus turned slightly, careful, controlled. "Officer, we do not consent to any search." That sentence changed everything. Hargrove's posture stiffened, his chin rising a fraction as if refusal itself were an act of disrespect. He walked toward Marcus first, stopping just short of him. "You know," he said, "it is always the same. People get defensive when there is something to hide." Marcus met his gaze without raising his voice. "Or when they are being treated unfairly." Hargrove gave a thin smile. "You think this is unfair?" "No. Unfair is me letting something slide and finding out later I should have trusted my instincts." He turned back toward Naomi. "Open the passenger door." Naomi looked at him for one long second, then toward the leather wallet still resting just inside on the seat, barely visible under the edge of her coat. She could end it with one movement, one flash of government credentials, One quiet sentence that would change the entire shape of this roadside performance. But something in her refused to give him the easy version. He had not stumbled into bias by mistake. He had chosen it step by step, word by word, as if no one here had the standing to challenge him. So she let the moment breathe. "Officer," she said, her voice calm enough to feel like ice. "You should be very careful about what you do next." The warning did not land the way it should have. Men who believe in their own authority often hear caution as defiance. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, and for the first time since the stop began, real irritation showed through the mask. "That sounds like a threat." "No," Naomi said. "It sounds like advice." The patrol radio crackled again from inside the cruiser, and a distant 18-wheeler rumbled somewhere beyond the tree line. It sounded low and heavy against the night. Marcus looked from Naomi to Hargrove and saw it then, the subtle shift in his wife's face. Not fear, not anger, but decision. He knew her well enough to recognize when silence was no longer restraint. It was timing. Hargrove, however, mistook that same stillness for surrender. He stepped toward the passenger side and reached for the door. And that was the moment the night finally began to turn against him. Officer Hargrove's fingers closed around the passenger door handle. But before he could pull it open, Naomi spoke in a tone so even it nearly disappeared beneath the hum of the patrol car lights. "Do not touch that door." He stopped, more from surprise than obedience, then turned toward her with a look that suggested no one had denied him anything in a long time. "Excuse me." Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not step back. She simply held his stare with that same calm that had unsettled him from the start. "You have already exceeded the reason for this stop," she said. "You have asked questions unrelated to lane position, implied criminal conduct without basis, and now you are moving toward my vehicle without legal justification. So I am telling you one more time. Do not touch that door." For a brief moment, the cold Virginia night seemed to narrow around the three of them, shrinking everything down to the sound of distant traffic and the steady mechanical pulse of red and blue against metal and glass. Marcus watched Hargrove's face carefully. He could see the officer trying to decide whether Naomi's words meant confidence or bluff. Men like him often assumed calm. Came from privilege they recognized, never from the strength of people they had already dismissed. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," Hargrove said at last. "No," Naomi replied. "You did that the moment you decided we did not belong in our own car." The words landed with a silence that felt heavier than shouting ever could. Hargrove's mouth tightened. He glanced toward Marcus as if hoping for interruption, some emotional outburst he could point to and call resistance. But Marcus only stood beside the cruiser with his hands visible and his breathing controlled, every part of him locked in the discipline of survival. That silence left Hargrove alone with what he had said and what he had meant, and somehow that made him even angrier. "You think you know what I decided?" he asked. Naomi did not blink. "I know exactly what I heard." He let out a breath through his nose and looked down at the passenger seat through the window, where the black leather wallet sat under the edge of her coat, like an answer waiting to be spoken. Still, he did not know what he was looking at. To him, it was just another accessory in a car he had already chosen to doubt. "Step aside," he said again, but now the authority in his voice had a crack in it, a strain he had not shown before. Naomi tilted her head the slightest bit, almost sad, as though she had seen this moment too many times in too many forms. "Officer Hargrove," she said, using his name for the first time, and something about hearing it from her made him go still. "You have been so focused on what you think we are that you never stopped to ask who we are." That sentence changed Marcus's expression. Not much, just enough. He knew the turn had come. He knew his wife had finished measuring the line between patience and necessity, and that once she crossed it, the entire night would shift. Hargrove sensed it too, though he did not understand why. The flashlight in his hand lowered a fraction. The wind moved Naomi's coat against her knees. Somewhere behind them, a second patrol unit answered the radio call he had placed minutes earlier, its siren giving one brief chirp in the distance before fading into approach. Backup. He had called for backup against a man in a suit and a woman in heels on their way home from a charity dinner. That fact alone would have been enough to tell the story. But Naomi was not finished letting him tell it on himself. She looked once toward the leather wallet, then back into his face. "You wanted this stop to prove something," she said softly. "It is about to." And with that, She reached for the passenger door herself, opened it with slow, deliberate precision, and lifted the black wallet into her hand. Naomi held the black leather wallet in one hand without opening it right away, and that single pause did more to change the atmosphere than any raised voice could have. Officer Hargrove looked at the wallet, then at her face, then back again, trying to read confidence where he had expected fear, but the meaning still had not reached him. The second patrol car was closer now, its headlights sliding across the trees before turning onto the shoulder behind his cruiser, adding another wash of white light to the red and blue already cutting through the dark. Marcus remained where he was, but something in his posture eased for the first time since the stop began. He knew Naomi well enough to recognize the exact instant she shifted from enduring a moment to controlling it. Hargrove, however, mistook that stillness for theater. "What is that supposed to be?" he asked. Naomi ran her thumb along the edge of the wallet, her gaze never leaving his. "Documentation," she said. "The kind you should have asked about before assuming the rest." He gave a short, irritated laugh. "Everybody has documentation. Not like this." The passenger door remained open beside her, the interior light casting a warm square of gold onto the pavement. In that light, the black wallet looked almost ordinary, just another object taken from a well-kept vehicle on a cold Virginia roadside. But Naomi knew what it carried. Not just a badge, not just credentials, but years of being underestimated before speaking, doubted before being heard, and judged before being known. She had learned long ago that some rooms changed the moment the truth arrived, and some men did too. The question was never whether the truth mattered. The question was how much damage pride could do before it was forced to face it. "Marcus," she said softly, still looking at the officer. "Are you all right?" "I am now," he answered, and there was something in those 3 words that made the backup officer, still stepping out of his vehicle behind them, slow down and assess the scene more carefully. He was younger than Hargrove, broad-shouldered, alert, his flashlight lowered instead of raised. He looked from Marcus in his suit, to Naomi in her cream coat, to Hargrove standing rigid by the passenger side, and even from a distance he could tell the stop had drifted far past ordinary. "Everything good up here?" the younger officer called. Hargrove did not answer immediately. His attention stayed locked on Naomi, as if he could still force the moment back into the shape he preferred. "Ma'am, if you are trying to intimidate me, it is not going to work." Naomi's expression did not change. "Officer, if I intended to intimidate you, we would not still be having this conversation." That landed harder than he expected. The younger officer took a few more steps forward, glancing at Hargrove with a look that asked a silent question. Naomi finally opened the wallet. Slow, precise, no drama, just the soft snap of leather folding back under her fingers. Inside, under the glow of the dome light and the pulsing wash of patrol lights, the gold and blue of federal credentials caught the night like a blade of truth. She held the badge where both officers could see it clearly, steady as stone. "Special Agent Naomi Reed," she said, each word measured and unmistakable. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that strips a man of every false assumption he had wrapped around himself and leaves him standing in nothing but the record of what he chose. Hargrove stared at the badge, then at Naomi, and for the first time all night, he looked unsure of where to place his hands. The younger officer stopped where he stood. Marcus closed his eyes for just half a second and let out a breath that had been trapped in his chest for miles. Naomi lowered the wallet only slightly. "Now," she said, calm as winter glass, "would you like to start this stop again?" The change in Officer Hargrove was immediate, but it was not graceful. It did not look like understanding. It looked like a man watching the ground disappear beneath him while trying to pretend he was still standing on solid ground. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw worked once, and his eyes dropped to the badge again, as if staring harder might somehow alter what he had just seen. But truth does not change because the wrong person finally notices it. The younger officer took another step forward, slower now, his expression shifting from routine caution to something closer to concern. "Sir," he said quietly to Hargrove, "is there a problem?" For a second, Hargrove said nothing. The silence around him had turned hostile, not because anyone had raised a hand or a voice, but because every choice he had made was still hanging there in the cold night air, intact and undeniable. Naomi did not move to fill the silence for him. She let it sit. She let him hear the weight of it. Then she closed the leather wallet with one measured motion and slipped it back into her hand, no longer as a warning, but as established fact. Special Agent Naomi Reed. She repeated, calm and clear. And this stop is now part of a documented interaction involving improper escalation, unsupported suspicion, and statements that raise serious concerns about bias. The younger officer's eyes flicked to Hargrove, then to Marcus, then back to Naomi. He was piecing it together now, not just the credentials, but the scene itself. A black man in a tailored suit still standing where he had been ordered. A black woman with federal identification forced to prove she belonged in her own vehicle. A stop that should have ended 10 minutes ago, but had instead swelled under the pressure of one man's assumptions. Marcus stepped away from the hood of the cruiser, not abruptly, just enough to reclaim the shape of himself, and Hargrove did not stop him. That alone said everything. "Officer," Marcus said, voice low and steady, "you asked how a couple like us ended up driving this car through Fairfax County after midnight. Here is your answer. We were driving home, and you were wrong." The words were not loud, but they landed harder than any argument could have. Hargrove looked at Marcus as if searching for some weakness left to exploit, some opening to recover his authority, but there was none. The moment had passed him by. The badge had not just revealed who Naomi was. It had revealed who he had chosen to be before he ever knew her name. The younger officer straightened. "Ma'am," he said, now addressing Naomi with the respect that should have been there from the beginning. "Do you need assistance?" Naomi held his gaze for a moment, measuring sincerity, then nodded once toward Hargrove's cruiser. "I need this interaction preserved exactly as it occurred," she said. "No edits. No summaries. No revisions shaped after the fact. I want body camera footage, dash camera footage, dispatch logs, and the reason this stop was extended beyond its original claim." Hargrove finally found his voice, but it sounded different now. Thinner, stripped of the confidence that had carried him through the first half of the night. "Agent Reed, I think this is being misunderstood." Naomi turned to him slowly, and there was something almost merciful in how quiet she remained. "No," she said. "It was misunderstood when you saw our skin and decided the rest of the story for yourself." The patrol lights kept turning across the dark highway, but they no longer felt like his lights. They felt like witness lights, exposing every smug assumption, every careless word, every second he believed no one important was watching. And that was the cruel little secret men, like Hargrove, never seemed to learn until it was too late. They always thought power was about who got questioned. They never imagined it could be about who remembered. Naomi did not raise her voice, because she did not need to. The kind of power she carried was not built for spectacle. It was built for record, consequence, and the slow collapse of excuses under verified facts. She looked at the younger officer first, not because Hargrove deserved relief from her attention, but because someone on that road needed to remember how professionalism was supposed to sound. "Officer," she said, "please note the time your unit arrived and that my husband and I were detained beyond the stated reason for the stop. Also note that consent to search was never given." The younger officer gave a small nod, his face tightening as the full shape of the situation settled over him. "Yes, ma'am." Hearing that word now, hearing the respect arrive only after the badge, pressed something heavy into the silence. Marcus felt it too. He stood beside the cruiser with his hands finally lowered at his sides, shoulders still firm but no longer braced for impact, and looked out at the empty highway that had become a courtroom without walls. Red and blue light kept rolling over the asphalt in long, restless bands, over the polished hood of the SUV, over Naomi's cream coat, over Hargrove's face, which had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "Agent Reed," he said, attempting a smile that never reached his eyes, "there is no reason to make this bigger than it is." Naomi turned to him with a stillness that felt almost holy. "Officer Hargrove, you made it bigger when you ignored procedure and followed instinct shaped by bias. I am simply refusing to make it smaller for your comfort." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There are moments when a man realizes that the story he has been telling himself all night has stopped working, and this was one of them. He could not call Marcus threatening because Marcus had remained composed. He could not call Naomi uncooperative because she had answered with precision. He could not hide behind uncertainty because his own words had laid out the truth in plain view. A couple like you. People try to look respectable all the time. You do not get to tell me how this stop goes. The younger officer shifted his weight and glanced toward Hargrove's cruiser, toward the camera mounted near the windshield, toward the body camera still fixed to Hargrove's chest like a silent witness that would not take sides. Sir, he said more carefully now, maybe we should clear them and close this out. Naomi's gaze moved to the younger officer, and for the first time there was a trace of softness in her expression, not because the moment had become easier, but because someone had finally chosen sense over ego. No, she said gently. We are not closing this out. We are documenting it. The words fell with the force of finality. Hargrove looked away toward the tree line as if the dark beyond the shoulder might offer him an exit that the scene itself no longer did. But the road stayed empty. The sky stayed black. The evidence stayed where it had always been, inside his own conduct. Marcus stepped closer to Naomi then, stopping at her side, not in front of her and not behind her, but beside her, where he had belonged all along. Their reflections appeared faintly in the passenger window of the SUV, two figures standing shoulder to shoulder beneath a wash of rotating light, no longer targets of suspicion, but witnesses to a man unraveling under the weight of his own assumptions. Naomi slipped the badge wallet back into her coat pocket and drew one steady breath. I want your supervisor notified, she said. I want the original stated basis for the stop preserved exactly as given. And I want every second after that reviewed in context. Hargrove finally looked at her again, and there was something broken in the set of his face now, not remorse exactly, but the first hollow outline of it, the beginning of a realization he could no longer outrun. Because karma, when it comes quietly, does not need drama. It only needs the truth to stay standing long enough for everyone to see who blinked first. The supervisor arrived 17 minutes later, and by then the night had changed in ways Officer Hargrove could never reverse. A white department SUV pulled onto the shoulder with no siren, no urgency in its motion, just the heavy quiet of official attention. Lieutenant Samuel Mercer stepped out into the flashing light with a dark overcoat over his uniform and the weary expression of a man who had seen too many roadside scenes turn ugly for reasons that had nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with pride. He took in the picture quickly. Marcus Reed standing calm but watchful beside his wife. Naomi Reed upright and composed, one hand in her coat pocket where her credentials rested, not displayed now because they no longer needed to be. Officer Hargrove rigid near his cruiser, saying nothing because there was finally nothing left for him to say that would not make things worse. The younger officer gave a brief summary, careful and factual, and Mercer listened without interrupting. Then Naomi spoke, and the road itself seemed to settle into her voice. She did not dramatize what had happened. She did not need embellishment. She laid it out with the precision of someone trained to separate feeling from record while still honoring the truth inside both. She repeated the original claim of lane drift. She described the questions about the vehicle, the insinuations, the attempt to extend the stop beyond lawful scope, the request to search without basis, the language used to imply that she and Marcus did not belong in their own lives. Mercer listened with his hands folded in front of him, eyes moving only once toward Hargrove when Naomi repeated the phrase "a couple like you." That was the moment the lieutenant's expression changed, not dramatically, just enough to show that one sentence had told him almost everything he needed to know. Officer Hargrove, Mercer said at last, his voice flat and controlled. Turn off your body camera and surrender it to me after I verify upload preservation. You are done with this stop. Hargrove blinked as if the words had reached him from far away. Sir, I can explain. Mercer looked at him for one long second. That is exactly what the footage is for. It was not loud. It was not theatrical. But it ended him in a way no shouting ever could. The younger officer stepped back, giving space where space was finally deserved. Marcus looked at Naomi, and in the rotating wash of patrol lights there was pride in his face, but also something sadder, older, the exhaustion of a man who knew that even this kind of ending did not erase the beginning. Naomi reached for his hand, and he took hers immediately. That simple touch felt more powerful than every badge on that road. Mercer turned to them with a different tone, the one that should have met them from the start. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, you are free to go. I will ensure this interaction is formally reviewed. Naomi held his gaze. Make sure it is reviewed for what it was, not what anyone wishes it had been. Mercer nodded once. Understood. She studied him for a moment, then gave the smallest nod in return. No smile, no triumph, because this was never about victory in the shallow sense. It was about restoring truth to a moment that had been twisted by assumption. Marcus opened the passenger door for her, and Naomi paused before getting in. She looked once more at Hargrove, who now stood in silence beside the cruiser that had once seemed to make him larger than everyone else. Under the cold lights and the black Virginia sky, he looked smaller than the choices he had made. You saw our skin, Naomi said softly, but you never saw us. Then she got into the SUV. Marcus walked around to the driver's side and slid behind the wheel, his hands steady now for a different reason. The engine came alive with a low-polished hum. The patrol lights still flashed in the mirrors as they pulled back onto the empty highway, but they no longer felt like a threat. They felt like something left behind. Ahead of them, the road stretched dark and clean beneath the moon, mile after mile of silence opening into home. And somewhere on that shoulder, a man who thought his badge gave him the right to define strangers had been forced to learn the one lesson power hates most. The truth does not need permission to outrank prejudice.